Yevamos Daf continues discussing the topic of whether a woman is believed to say that her husband has died and she's allowed to remarry. We'll also get into other ways of establishing that a man had died and that his wife is allowed to remarry. The Daf discusses three central questions. First of all, we had said that she's not believing in a situation where there is a war in the world because she may rely on an assumption that he probably died and say it as a certainty that he for sure died. What happens if she's the one who told us that there's a war in the world and we didn't know that on our own? Would we then believe her because we're depending on her testimony to establish the reason that she's not believed in the first place? Now we'll get on to a discussion about, is an Eid Echad believed in a situation where there's a war in the world, and what about some simanim, if they are signs, indications of a man's identity, and we're not sure what his identity is without signs, can you rely on those? We'll also get into other topics of simanim when they can be used to establish other things. Now the Gemara is going to bring a number of proofs. We'll have a Brisa and a Mishnah. We'll also have a number of stories, incidents that happened, and psakim that were given. So let's begin. So our first Shiloh, which is at the last line on Daf Kuf Yud Dalid Amid Beis, is what happens when you have a woman who comes and she says, listen, I came from a country far away, my husband died there in a war. We had no idea that there was a war there at all. Now generally we said if there is a war, she's not believed because she tends to assume that he died. She ran away from the battlefield without fully seeing that he had died, and she assumes that he did, because it's highly unlikely that he survived, and therefore we don't trust the fact that he really is dead. The question is, in this case, without her testimony, we would not know that there was a war at all, and we would believe her. If she would just come here and say, my husband is dead, he died, we would believe her. We would have no issue to assume, we wouldn't have any reason to assume that there's a problem. She's the only one who told us there's a war. She told us, though, that he died in the war, so we have a concept of Pesha Asar. She's the one who established the problem in the first place. Can she be relied on to solve it? Do we say that if she was lying, she would have told us a different lie? On the other hand, it's not really a lie. It's not that we suspect her of lying. We suspect her of making a mistake. We suspect her of assuming that he died, even though she didn't 100% see that he died. So the Gemara is going to bring a couple of proofs here. The Gemara's first proof is to say that she is not trusted even in a situation where she's the one who told us that there's a war. The Gemara brings a brisa that says that if she comes and she says that we were smoked out of our house or smoked out of our cave, that if she and her husband were together in a cave and some enemies came and set up smoke, they lit a fire there and forced him out because of the smoke, she escaped, but she says, I got out, but my husband did not, he died. So the halacha there is that she's not believed. So you see that even though we did not know that she was dealing with enemies there, we didn't know about the situation, she could have just said that he died of natural causes and she would have been believed. Still, she's not believed. So the Gemara says it's different there. The case over there is where she said clearly what happened. And she said, look, I didn't see that he died. I just saw that I ran out and he didn't run out, so I assume he died. She was clear that it was an assumption there. So our correction over there is that we say to her, look, just like you managed to get out somehow, maybe he got out somehow. Maybe there was another door, there was another escape route, and he managed to get out. If you got out, he could have gotten out as well. However, in a situation where she's not saying that she's relying on an assumption, we would not accuse her of relying on an assumption, could be since she's the only one who established that there's a war here at all. Okay, the Gemara tries to bring another proof, and that's where they were attacked either by Ovdei Kechavim or by Listim, by robbers. And she says, I survived, I escaped, he did not escape. And over there, the halacha is that she is believed. So you see that even that because she's the one who created the situation, we would not have known that they were attacked, therefore she is believed. So the same thing should be true in the case of a war. The Gemara says no. This is different because a woman is always going to be safe when she's attacked by robbers because they want to hold on to her for iznus. Like Rav Idi said, a woman has her weapons with her at all times. It's an expression referring to the fact that they're not going to kill her because she's a woman. So therefore, she didn't have to fear the listim, and therefore she could stick around and see to the end, and she knows that she was able to see that he really died for sure. However, in the case of a war, maybe she was afraid that she is going to get killed. War doesn't distinguish between men and women, and therefore she would not really know for sure. All right, another Gemara brings an incident. There was a man who had his own chuppah at his wedding. There was a fire. He caught fire, and he was killed in the fire. And his wife, who was a Eshes Ish already, at the time of the fire, she told the people who were there, look, see, my husband is burned, and they looked and they saw a charred corpse and a dismembered hand. That's what they saw. That was the case over there. So Rabbi Bar Avin wanted to say, so this is the case of smoked out of the house. We didn't know what happened. She came and she told us. Just like in the case of smoked out of the house, she's not believed to say that he died. Here also, she's not believed to say that it was her husband who died. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. There's a couple of differences here. First of all, there's a body in front of us. Here we see the body. The case of the smoked out house, we didn't see a body. Second of all, she said, see, this is my husband. She's pointing specifically. She's saying, my husband has died. Here he is. He burned. So the Gemara therefore says that Rava wanted to argue that here she should be believed, even though in the case of the smoke out, she is not believed. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Bar Avin, however, disagreed, like we said before, and he said, no, not going to be believed here, even though there is a body, because the body could be someone else, could be somebody came to save him, and the guy who came to save him, he's the one who died, and it could be that the hand was burned off. That's why there's a hand. So where's the husband? If he's alive, why is he not here? Could be that he got badly injured or disfigured in the blaze, and he's embarrassed of how he looks, and therefore he ran away. Okay. Now the Gemara has a question. What about an Eid Echad? So we've seen that in Eid Echad, a single witness is believed to establish the death of a man and the remarriageability of his wife. The question is that also only if you don't have a war in the world? If you have a war in the world, do you say that the same way you wouldn't trust the wife, you wouldn't trust the Eid Echad either? So what's the two sides of the argument? The question is, what is the reason that an Eid Echad is generally trusted? Is it because an Eid Echad would never testify that a husband had died unless he's sure, because the husband is probably going to show up one day and then he'll look really bad? If that's true, then that's true here as well. Or is the problem that we are depending on the wife to also do her own investigations when an Eid Echad comes? And therefore, we assume you need the wife's testimony. The wife has to do her own work to make sure that he died. However, in a case where she possibly hated him and she didn't want him, and he comes and he's testifying, so you have two factors together. First of all, there's a war, so you may not know for sure. That makes his testimony weaker. Second of all, you're relying on her. She may have an option that she hated him. That might make her testimony weaker. So combining these two negative factors together, maybe you wouldn't trust an Eid Echad, even though normally you would assume that the woman would do the work. So the Gemara says, okay, let's bring a couple of proofs over here. So the Gemara's first proof is from a story that happened with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, and I went to Naharda to work on being Ma'aber the year, whether or not to make it a leap year. So I met Nehemiah Ish Beis Deli. And Nehemiah said to me, I heard that the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael do not allow a woman to get remarried based on one witness, except for Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. He's the only one who allows it. So Rabbi Akiva said, I said, it's true. So he said, go tell those Rabbanim in my name that you know that this country is filled with soldiers passing to and fro, and I have a tradition based on Rabban Gamliel Zakein that you're allowed to make a woman get remarried based on 1/8. So the Gemara says, why does he say that there are soldiers traveling about the land? What does it have to do with anything? Obviously he's saying, even though there is a war going on and there are soldiers passing through, still Rabbi Gamliel was saying you're allowed to get married based on 1/8. You're allowed to assume the husband had died. So therefore you see clear proof. The answer to our question is yes, an Eid Echad is trusted even in a situation where there's a war. So Gemara says, no, that cannot be the pshat. If that was the pshat, so then why did he say this country has soldiers passing through it? Let him say any country that has soldiers passing through it. There are many countries in the world that have a war in it. The fact that he said this country, he's trying to say something else. He's trying to say, I would come tell you myself, but I can't. Nobody could leave their house because there's a war going on. That's why I'm not traveling to Eretz Yisrael right now. However, Rabbi Akiva is, and therefore I'm giving him this message through him. But it's a tradition that I have directly from Rabban Gamliel, son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Okay, next proof. So the next proof is that we have a story again. There were two Talmidei Chachamim that were traveling together with Abba Yosi ben Simoi. They were traveling in a ship, and the ship sunk, and they drowned. And Rabbi allowed these two men he allowed the wives of these two men to get remarried based on the testimony of women who said, we saw that they drowned. So the Gemara says, now, drowning in the water, they didn't see the body. So that's like, there's a war there. So there's the same risk that they may have assumed that he died, even though he didn't die. So, obviously, now, multiple women count as Eid Echad. So therefore, this is testimony of Eid Echad, and you see that even though there's a risk that it counts as just as if there was a war, still you allow them to get remarried. So an Eid Echad is believed even in a situation of a war. So Gemara says, hold on a second, there's a problem here. The problem is that if you understand the situation the way you said it over, it doesn't make sense that they were allowed to get remarried at all because it was at sea. Sea is called Mayim She'en Lam Seif. It's water with no edge, which Rashi defines as you can't see the shore on all four sides. And something like that, we always don't allow anybody to get remarried based on being drowned there, because you never know if he got saved. He could have come up somewhere else. He drowned, he went under in front of you and came up someplace else. So you can never rely on the fact that he went under at sea. So it must be that the situation over here was that they saw them being pulled out of the water. That these women had testified, we saw them go down and they came up right away and we were able to recognize their features. It was soon enough after they drowned that the water did not distort their features. And therefore we have simanim. And based on the simanim that they saw, they had specific signs that these were those two men. They said that these men for sure are dead and you're allowed to have their wives get remarried. That being the case, this testimony that we're allowing is not because an Eid is believed even in a wartime, it's because there are simanim, and simanim take away the concern over here. All right, now the Gemara goes to another case about simanim. Once we're on the topic of simanim, that signs count for something. So this is not going to be about a husband dying and marrying his wife. It's going to be about monetary claims. So you have a person who stored a container of sesame seeds with his friend. He said, "Can you watch these for me?" And then he came to collect them. He said, "Give me back my sesame seeds." He said, "You already took them." He said, "I did not take them. They are in your possession. There's a barrel, and here's the barrel. This is what you have them here in this barrel, and if you count, you'll see that there are exactly the following measure of sesame seeds that are in there." So he gave a sign, he gave a siman, the exact number. And then he said, so the person who he was claiming from responded, and he said, "No, you took yours, and these are mine. Yours are gone, and these are mine." So Rav Chizda wanted to say that this is like the case of the two Talmidei Chachamim, where there was a siman, and we trusted based on the siman that these are those same Talmidei Chachams. Here also, based on the siman, you should also trust that these are the same sesame seeds. And this guy is claiming these are other sesame seeds. These are my sesame seeds. We don't assume that they are different sesame seeds. We assume they are the same one. So the Gemara says that Rava does not agree. Rava said, no, there's a big difference because this siman is not a good siman. Just the amount of sesame seeds that were in there could possibly have been different sesame seeds, which happen to be the same amount. That's not such an impossible scenario. The case of the simanim over there were simanim of hakim. They saw specific signs that no one else has. So therefore, you can't compare that case to this case. All right, another more question is whether there really is a possibility that the kli was emptied out and refilled with other things. We have a siman. It's not a great siman, but we have a siman. You want to say that no, it was emptied out. It's not the same thing that was there before. Is that a concept? Is that a real possibility that we consider halachically? So Rav Chizda said to Rav Ashi, is there such a concern? What he calls emptying out. We have a Mishnah that shows otherwise. The Mishnah says you find a kli and there's a siman on it. It has a kuf for carbon, a mem for meiser, a dalet for demua, or a tes for tevel, or a taf for truma. That's showing that the contents of this container is either carbon, which means that it's hektish, mum, it's a mem, which means that it's meiser, the dalet means that it's a mixture of chulin and a truma, the tes means that it's tevel, non-meiser, and therefore it's iser, and the taf, which means that it's truma, and it has to go to kohanim. Now the reason it would be a siman was because there were times in Jewish history when we were not allowed to do mitzvahs. There were xeras based on the government that was in charge at the time, and therefore we had to make simanim. So, do we say that this siman shows what's in it, or do we say that the siman was left on the container, this is what was in it before, but it's not what's in it now? So, this Mishnah says, you do assume that the siman accurately reflects what's in it. So you see that you do not have a serious possibility, even though this is not such a strong siman, you don't have a serious possibility that it was emptied out. So the Gemara says, good proof, but I have a proof against it, and therefore we're going to have to figure something out. My proof against it is, we have a different brisa. The end of the brisa, actually, is Rav Yossi, and he says even if you found the barrel and it says on it the word truma, what's in there is assumed to be chulin. You don't assume that it's truma because you could say that it had truma in it last year and it was emptied out and now it's filled with chulin. So you see, there's a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Yossi. So what is the machlokes about? Is there such a concept of an assumption as emptied out or not? So the Gemara says it's got to be that both of them understand that there is concept of emptying out. Even though you have a siman, it could be emptied out or not. The question is here, are these valid simanim or not? Do you assume that had it been emptied, he would have erased it, scratched off the siman? That's what the Tanna Kama says, and therefore it's a valid siman. You can assume that it's accurate reflection of what's inside. And Rebbe says no, it could be that he forgot to scratch it off, or he left it there on purpose so that people would think it's truma. He didn't want them to touch his things. Either way, there's a valid simanim there. Okay, these valid simanim don't count to show what is inside. Okay, now the Gemara goes to a story which will take us to the question of what happens when you have someone that you're identifying, you don't personally know him. Can you rely on the fact that people say that this person is linked to this name? Or do you have to be afraid it's someone else with the same name? So the case was, it was known that there was a man named Yitzchak Reish Galusa, who was the son of the sister of Rav Bivi, and he was traveling from Kortova to Aspamia. And he seemed to have died along the way, and people are identifying him and saying, this is Yitzchak Reish Galusa. They came to Aspamia, and they said, this is the body of Yitzchak Reish Galusa, the son of the daughter of Rav Bivi, who was traveling from Kortova to Aspamia. So the Gemara says maybe it was a different Rav Yitzchak Reish Galusa. Maybe there was two Yitzchak Reish Galusas out there. How do we know that this is the one that you're thinking of? So Gemara questions, is there really such a concern or not? So Abai says there is such a concern. You cannot assume that this is the one that you thought of, the one who you are aware of that left. And Rava says, no, maybe this is the exact, Rava says you could assume this is the same one. You don't assume there's someone else who's identified by the same name. Okay, so Machlekes Abai and Rava, they each have to give their source. So Abai says, my source is from the fact that a get was once found in a Nahar Da, and it was written on it as follows, that this is in the city of Klunya. I, Andruli Noi, from Nahar Da, I'm divorcing my wife with this. And this get was found, and there's a woman claiming that my husband's name is Andruli Noi, he's from Nahar Da, he gave me this get, and I lost it, and therefore I need it so that I can get remarried. So they sent the question to Avu Shmuel, can you use this or not? And Avu Shmuel sent the question to Yehuda Nesiya, questioning, can you assume that this is the same person that she's saying is her husband, or could be somebody else with the same name? So he sent back, check the whole Nahar Da, see if you find somebody with that name. If you don't find anybody else with that name, it's good. So Abaye says, so that's my source, that obviously you have to check. You are afraid that there are two people with the same name. Rava said it's not a good source. It's not a good source because if you're right that you're really concerned that there's such a person with that name, why are you checking Nahar Da? Maybe he came from somewhere else. His star was found in Nahar Da. It could be that he came from somewhere else. That was his name. And he's not in Nahar Da. He came to Nahar Da. How do you know that you just have to check in Nahar Da itself? So obviously there's a different reason that he was sending to check Nahar Da, and that's he was trying to honor Avu Shmuel. He was trying to honor Shmuel's father. Didn't want him to make it seem like he asked a dumb question. But really the truth of the matter is there is no such concern. All right, now what's Rava's source? How does Rava know that there is no such concern? So the Gemara says because there were two contracts that were issued in the city of Mechuzah, and they both were written, they were a loan from Chavi bar Nanai and Nanai bar Chavi. That was the names of the lender and the borrower. And Rava had somebody brought this, and he used it to collect. Gemara says it has to be Rabbah, otherwise the proof doesn't make sense. So it's Rabbah, the Bach changes it to Rabbah. So they collect with this star the amount of loan that it said on it. Now, there are lots of Chavi bar Nanai and Nanai bar Chavi in Mechuzah. Mechuzah had lots of people with that name. And therefore, obviously you don't have to be concerned at all that this star came from somebody else. So therefore, I have a proof, you don't have to be concerned. So says Abaye, this is different. This is different because even though there could be, and there certainly is someone with that name, there's no way that this person could have gotten hold of the star unless it was a really valid star that's money that he was owed. Because how could he have gotten it? You think the real owner was someone else and he dropped it? Can be, because we have a rule that people hold on to their staros. When you have a star that people owe you money, you don't lose them. We don't assume that they get lost. Now, maybe he gave it to this person as the pikadon. He said, watch it for me. Can't be he would give it to somebody with the same name. That would be foolish. That would be asking for trouble. The only other possibility is that the star was written for these two people and it was given, but the loan was never actually made. The obligation was never actually created. So there we have halacha osius niknas ben mesira. The obligation is chal as soon as you give the contract. So the obligation therefore still exists, even if that was the scenario. Therefore, in this case, there's no way you could have gotten it even if there was somebody else by the same name. However, if you're talking about identifying a body, so it could be two people with the same name. This could be not that guy. It's not the one that you're thinking.